Hello there, and welcome to the Digital Foundry roundup of the best hardware of 2025. Pre-CES 2026, where we expect to see a whole bunch of fantastic new stuff, but this is everything that we've enjoyed over the last 12 months. Joining me to discuss it, first of all, Oliver Mackenzie.
Yes, Rich, I am looking forward to CES, but I think there's plenty of exciting stuff in our recent past here with this list.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, of course, Alex Battaglia.
Yeah, man, CES 2025 wasn't too long ago in my brain, so this is a little bit scary, but a lot of hardware to go through here.
Okay, then. So we're going to kick off, first of all, by talking about handhelds, which has been a major growth area for gaming hardware the last few years. And we've been spoilt this year, I'd say. Plenty of fantastic new devices for us to get excited about. I'm going to start off by talking about the device which I was kind of like, I didn't believe anyone would do it, but they did do it, and others are following. And that is the concept that Strix Halo, this massive 400 square millimeter piece of silicon, has actually made its way into a handheld. And I've got one of them, and it is the GPD Win 5. Now, the first thing to say about this device, which I think is pretty awesome, is just the fact that it's actually small. Handhelds are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but this thing, on the width side, it's actually smaller than a Switch 2. It's smaller than a Steam Deck. But it has Strix Halo inside. Absolutely phenomenal. 7-inch LCD VRR panel, very similar to the Asus ROG Ally. And it is an actual proper handheld. I think that's the proper sort of way to describe it here. And the way they've done it is kind of crazy. They've basically taken the battery out of the design, which is kind of cool, because it's an external thing that you can either mount on the back, it clips into place there, or you can just tether it via a supplied cable. 80 watt hour battery there. So, running the machine at 30 watts, you're good for just under 2 hours, I'd say. That's a fairly decent amount of battery life. When you're running this thing at a fairly decent wattage, but you can go further. You can go much further. The top of the device actually has an input for basically a laptop power supply, and it comes with a 200 watt laptop power supply. So if you're at home and you're tethered, so to speak, with this power supply, you can run this thing at like up to 75 watts, I believe. And here is where things get excited. In my previous coverage, we've looked at what Strix Halo can do at higher wattages, and it translates completely to this handheld at circa 75 watts. So let's take a look at this PlayStation 5 comparison. It's our classic Alan Wake 2 head-to-head. And man, this is just kind of like crazy. On the mains here, running with that laptop power supply, seems to be running at an average of sort of 65 watts here. You're getting 93.5% of the PlayStation 5 performance on match settings. So 1440p output, low settings with slight tweaks to, I think it's scattered object density goes down to medium, but otherwise it's low settings. And 93.5% of PlayStation 5 performance, which is just stupid. It's just kind of nuts. Take out that AC power supply and just run it from the battery, and you're down to 69.6, 70% of PlayStation 5 performance from a handheld. At the exact same settings, by the way. We'll talk about tweak settings in a minute. But Oliver, this is what I was kind of expecting and hoping for, but at the same time, completely insane. This product just doesn't really make any sense, and yet it works.
Yeah, the performance here is highly, highly impressive, and hopefully it presages devices that maybe run on RDNA 5 and are a little bit more power efficient perhaps in the future that we might end up seeing, like obviously the potential PlayStation 6 handheld that's been mooted so much and rumored so heavily. Taking a PS5 1440p experience and shrinking it down to a lower resolution, or indeed running it at 1440p like you have here, it's pretty extraordinary to get that out of a handheld. And indeed, the power scaling that we see out of Strix Halo, it seems to start scaling pretty well around 20 watts or so, 25 watts. And it really kicks into high gear. Like at 30 watts, you're looking at maybe double the performance of a standard like, Z2 Extreme, Z1 Extreme type product there that you might see in a more typical device, like some of the devices we'll be talking about shortly. And that's kind of a higher-ish range. But for a PC handheld, pushing out 30 watts, actually pretty reasonable. 65 watts above in that territory, perhaps much less so. But I do think that these devices are really interesting in their target wattage because they actually do scale a lot better than you'd suspect. Like you're saying, you're getting almost 70% of PS5 performance, 30 watts. That's totally a reasonable power target to aim for with a handheld.
Yeah. It is kind of crazy because although you have got this massive amount of silicon there and you have got the advantages of process node advantage over the PlayStation 5 and more compute units, memory bandwidth is much, much lower than a PlayStation 5. So the concept that this is happening at all, I think is absolutely remarkable. But yeah, you talk about 30 watts there, Oliver, and we do have some results there because obviously we are outputting at 1440p there to match a PlayStation 5, but the GPD Win 5 only has a 1080p screen. So it's kind of like, not really a realistic scenario for handheld gaming. And so we reran the test. And this time, while the PlayStation 5 here is still in its performance mode, still 1440p, targeting 60 frames per second. What we're doing with the GPD Win 5 now here is to basically drop it down to 30 watts and at the same time reduce the output resolution to match the screen, 1080p. So it is effectively PlayStation 5 settings at a lower resolution and a couple of FSR upscaling factors that we've got here. And basically FSR balanced mode. You're getting basically 86% of PlayStation 5 performance there with the reduced wattage, but with reduced resolution. So some nice scaling there. Go to FSR performance mode, which will be upscaling from like 540p. Still looks all right on a 7-inch screen. 93% of PlayStation 5 throughput there. So that's really, really cool because, basically that's kind of what you would expect from a handheld. Scale down the resolution, scale down the power for similar performance. I'm quite pleased about this. And what I can't really show you with these benchmarks is that because it is running on a VRR screen in the hand, you can't really tell that it's running at any kind of different speed to the PlayStation 5 version because it's so close. And yet, you've got VRR to smooth out the sort of VSync stutter or the tearing that might have appeared there. So this is actually pretty cool. What do you think, Alex?
Yeah, I think it's also great that you have a screen that will, by virtue of it, having a high refresh rate, it'll have a lower VRR ceiling than a 60 hertz VRR game on a PlayStation 5 that isn't using a 120 hertz container. And when you get into that 48 to 50 range, even 45, going down to like 43 FPS, it's pretty actually hard to tell the difference in like stroboscopic motion of which frame rate is actually higher, because you're just talking about milliseconds of frame there. You have to start getting the multiples before you start seeing differences again. And I think that is very telling. You're essentially getting like a handheld PlayStation 5 experience, which, like you said, when you're running we've seen this with Switch 2 quite often, that even though like the internal metrics tell you one thing, as soon as you start shrinking screen size, image quality concerns become less and less and less. And I think that's really cool. The one thing that I like about this handheld device the most is that I've personally found, as someone who doesn't use them too often, that every single time a new one's announced, I just kind of don't feel anything about it because they're all based upon very similar technology bases. And this one, due to the fact that it is using a different chip, different process, different everything, different package completely, it is very different from the rest of the AMD based handhelds, right? And I think it's nice to finally see some level of innovation in the market, which I otherwise felt like beyond the Steam Deck and, iterations thereon in terms of like one has VRR screen, one uses a processor that has more, more oomph to it, one has more memory, but I didn't feel like the experience was that much different on a whole. So I was really happy to see something that does look at least somewhat generationally better to a great degree, because like the games you could run on this, there's a number of them that just could never run on a Steam Deck. So I think that's great.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of like the leap that we want, but possibly not with the silicon that they've provided. It's just like extreme stuff. But let's take a look at the Xbox Ally X comparison here, because we had to do it. And this is actually running at 35 watts, which is the highest that the machine can run power-wise. FSR performance mode, so 540p upscaling to 1080p, up against the GPD Win 5, up against the PlayStation 5 at its 1440p output. And basically, the Ally X there is giving 54% of the GPD Win 5 performance. Oliver, you're quite right. It is basically double the performance of the Z2 Extreme there. And it's also literally like 51% of what the PlayStation 5 is doing. So when you factor in the fact we're still running at a relatively high wattage for the Xbox Ally X there, when you're factoring in that the resolution has dropped like massively down in order to accommodate that, and it's still only doing like half the performance of the other devices. This is the gulf that we'd like to see bridged going forward with next generation mainstream handhelds. But in the meantime, GPD Win 5, and there's a couple of other devices using Strix Halo. The hype is real, I'd say. Strix Halo in a handheld, didn't think they would do it. They did do it. It kind of works. The only thing I would say, above 30 watts, the fans really, really spin up on this thing and it becomes quite loud. But at 30 watts here, I mean, perfectly fine, perfectly equitable, I'd say. Mm-hmm. Pretty awesome stuff. But we're not done with handhelds. Oliver, you've been in Z1 Extreme and Z2 Extreme land. So what have you got to share?
Yes. Well, should we start with the ROG Xbox Ally X, perhaps? Yeah, that's an interesting device. So obviously this is Microsoft's first kind of co-branded foray into handhelds, with Asus kind of taking the lead in terms of the hardware design and also in terms of some of the aspects of the software design. It ships with Xbox full screen experience, which is kind of a mixed bag at the moment. But I think one element that they really nail here is the hardware, because it has a nice ergonomic shape, and they really did push out a good feeling handheld. I mean, the buttons feel great, the rumble feels great. They hit every single mark. I think the key issue with this device doesn't really come down to its hardware configuration, doesn't really come down to anything you see visually. It's just the Windows experience. It has like lots of smaller issues. It has inconsistent sleep-wake behavior. It has some like stuttering issues in games that I've noticed that I hope to document more in future content. Maybe I need to keep a diary of all the problems that I have with Windows on this device on a daily basis, because it really is quite impactful. It was so impactful indeed that I installed Bazite within, I think, 2 days of owning it, 3 days of owning it, which does not really indicate very much confidence in that Windows experience product. So I think it's a better experience, but it has lots of problems relative to where Windows was before. I think Microsoft needs to make a lot of inroads in that handheld experience to really be competitive with some of the Bazite and SteamOS devices that are in the market that we might talk about in the future. Because those devices really do offer a pretty seamless end-to-end experience, or at least as seamless as you can get with PC software running on a handheld device.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, we've been promising an Xbox Ally X review for so long, and we will get around to it. But I think the thing that kind of put me off doing the full review, I mean, we did that mini roundup of benchmarks and stuff and impressions when we first got it for the Direct. I don't have anything more to add to that. It's just, it's the same old story, really. Really good performance, really good hardware. Windows is clearly on a sort of transition period at the moment, and it's not quite there yet. Maybe when new features come along, like Auto SR version 2.0, that will warrant maybe, something new and exciting that we can build a review around. But I still don't really see it as an Xbox console. I see it as a PC handheld. You have to put up with the foibles of Windows exactly the same as I did with my ROG Ally X, the non-Xbox version, the prior gen version, which I still think is a really fantastic handheld, by the way. It has been one-upped by the Xbox Ally X, but it is clearly an evolution. There isn't any kind of mega jump here that makes you say, wow, okay, console has come to handheld, because it hasn't really. I don't know what you think, Alex.
No, I think you were going to require, you're going to require many more iterations of Windows before that even becomes the case. We talked about onboarding in that video. We also talked about stability of the new front end. as well as I would say, incomplete still advanced shader delivery. It's only supporting a select subset of the entire PC catalog of games. And, I don't think everyone just only plays AAA latest titles, etc. You go back. What happens if I want to play some really crappy old game that had tons of shader compilation stutter, right? Well, then you're just going to live with it. Whereas on a SteamOS-based device with Fossilize, you're presumably going to be getting a great deal of the shader package there, coverage. And you just wouldn't get that on a Windows device currently. And that is a huge core flaw. So they need to, once again, Microsoft actually more seriously entering the gaming market, instead of just letting everyone else do it for them, requires them to keep up with features that other platforms have had for a long time, and they are at a severe disadvantage because they are so far behind. So that's where it is right now. And I think when, like you said, when that Auto SR 2.0 comes out, that was probably a really great time to actually start looking at the product in a more full light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Oliver, should we move on? Because there's another device that you're quite excited to talk about.
Yeah, I think perhaps we should. And that is indeed the Lenovo Legion Go S with Z1 Extreme. Right. Because that's actually a product that I have right here. And
oh boy,
it is, for my money, the best handheld on the market, at least for me, outside of the Steam Deck. So if you're not interested in the Steam Deck, or indeed the Nintendo Switch 2, which is a handheld of its own, but it's obviously not a PC handheld, it doesn't really operate in the same space, nor really targets the same class of customer, I think. It's a really good device, in my opinion. It's got great hardware. It's got a great big 8-inch display. It's got very comfortable controls. A Z1 Extreme chip, which is not as fast as Z2 Extreme, but not that far off. 20 points off here and there. It's more impactful at lower wattages, but at higher wattages, it's pretty competitive. It's got a VRR 120 hertz panel, which is kind of like table stakes for handhelds at this point. I think that's really important to have a VR panel that can target high refresh rates. But the key differentiator here relative to other PC handhelds is it's got SteamOS by default with full Valve support. Alex and I saw it at CES, I want to say this year, technically. It's been so long. But I thought it was a pretty cool device then, and since then, having it in my hands, it's been really terrific. Compared to ROG Ally, I mean, it has a different kind of ergonomics to it. It's not got the handles. It's got more of a curved design, actually more similar to the old ROG Allies, which did not have those big handles. But I actually find it comparably comfortable, if not a little bit more comfortable. The fact that it's native SteamOS, no BASIC, no configuring anything. Like literally, I turned it on, and within 5 minutes, I was installing games. Like login, instantly installing games. I think with my ROG Ally, it was 2 hours before I even went to Windows.
Right.
The setup process was absolute insanity. There are some downsides to it. It's only got a 55 watt-hour battery, which is pretty low for a device like this. It doesn't last too long on battery, I would say. It's also a little bit more complex to open up and swap out components. I've not had to do that yet, but if you want to swap out the SSD, or if you want to swap out sticks or anything like that, it's pretty complicated. Whereas with the ROG Ally, they make that really simple, which I quite like. And it also has 32 gigabytes of RAM instead of 24 gigabytes, although the utility of that, especially in a unified memory environment, perhaps it's not quite necessary. But yeah, it's the handheld that I'd recommend for most people. Number one, if you're not interested in the Switch 2. Number two, if you're not interested in the Steam Deck. This is like the third one that I feel really comfortable recommending to most people, because there's no forgive my French, BS in this whole process.
Right.
It is a really straightforward process from beginning to end. It is a foolproof system as far as I'm concerned, at least as far as these PC handhelds go. And it's a really high quality experience, and it's a bit cheaper than some of the other PC handhelds as well that are shipping with Z2 Extreme. This is actually a little bit on the cheaper end relative to those devices.
Cool. Yeah, I just want to insert a final little device extra. The MSI Claw 8 AI Plus has the Lunar Lake chipset, 32 gigs of memory. It's actually a really pleasing handheld. I think the thing that I like about it the most, I mean, benchmark-wise, it kind of slots in between Z1 Extreme and Z2 Extreme. But the one complaint that we always have about all of these AMD handhelds is that there isn't a decent upscaler available for it, or a decent ML-based upscaler available for it. I need to spend more time with this and what's presumably going to be coming next, a Panther Lake version of it, because you do get XeSS, the full fat XeSS, which would solve that problem. Whether that actually is enough to sort of counterbalance against all of the features that Intel doesn't have, that AMD does have, remains to be seen. But I have spent some time with the Claw, and I really, really like it, and I can't wait to see more. But let's round up our handheld section by talking about, I don't know if you'd call it the winner, but it's certainly the winner in terms of sales, the Nintendo Switch 2, which in some senses actually came in much as we were expecting, but in other senses outstripped expectations, particularly in terms of efficiency. But Oliver, you've kind of taken point on Switch 2 coverage, so what do you reckon?
Yeah, well, obviously with the Switch 2, the big talking point ahead of launch was what's going on with the SoC, because there was some discussion about the fact that it was likely using an 8nm SoC. Now, in time, we've discovered that it's actually more of an 8nm/10 nanometer hybrid device. Obviously, those two processes being quite similar from Samsung. But the key innovation there has been the use of DLSS in particular. Alex calls it the tiny DLSS, the DLSS Lite, whatever you want to call it. That is presumably a much smaller model that has problems with aliasing and motion, that has problems, different kinds of problems, but is evidently quite cheap, cheap enough to do things like 4K upscales and 1440p upscales. And that's been a real game changer for the hardware and complex games, AAA titles that we've noted. But yeah, I think it's tricky with Switch 2 because, like John has made abundantly clear, people have mixed feelings about the hardware.
Right.
If you evaluate it as just like another handheld, right? So the SoC is very efficient. That's a big plus point, but it is using an older architecture. The vibration response is quite good, but the controls are a bit undersized. It supports SD Express, which is fast. It's nice relative to SD, but it's expensive relative to SD. It's like 2 times, 3 times, 4 times as expensive, even as comparably sized SD cards. And it only comes with 256 gigabytes of SSD space internally, which on another device would be kind of like, that's really scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of sizing. The screen is 120 hertz and supports VR, which are things we like to see in handhelds, but it's a uniformly lit LCD with poor response times, and it tends to look quite laggy and glowy in dark content. But I think the thing is with the Switch 2 is it's tough because like evaluating it just as a handheld is really limited relative to the other devices. I think it's not the way to look at it. It's a platform. It's a huge platform. It's not just a PC handheld. It's got bespoke ports. It's got exclusive games. It's got its own OS, SDK, graphics API. Games are really coded with the capabilities of the system in mind. It also means a really smooth experience using the OS and software typically. And it has docking functionality that other handhelds can't even come close to match. Like whether it's SteamOS, whether it's Windows, no other handheld is going to automatically increase TDP for you, adjust settings for you, accommodate wireless controllers perfectly. It's a great system. And then also you can overcome some of the Switch 2's deficiencies with some of the products that have sprung up in the third-party marketplace because it is such a huge device. Like I always use these grips on my Switch 2 to make it a lot more comfortable for me, right? These cheap grips, I got them off of AliExpress for $5 or something. And they make this device feel actually really comfortable to hold, maybe more comfortable than other PC handhelds, because the device itself, it's kind of like this naked robotic core of a device that's so thin, you can kind of do whatever you want with it, right? You can put it into all kinds of different configurations. That's something that it's actually more flexible in a way. When you consider the whole ecosystem, it's a very flexible device. So yeah, I think this Switch 2 is maybe a more important hardware launch than any of the other handhelds we're looking at today, any of the other devices we're really going to talk about for this year's hardware wrap up here. And it's going to do things that you're going to see out of no other handheld machine, in my opinion. But the hardware itself, if we're just evaluating it as like hardware of the year, it has clear high points, it has clear low points. And I think to really resolve most of those low points, we're going to have to see a SWOLED 2 down the line. I think that's kind of the product that we're all thinking about. In like 2 years, maybe we're coming back 3 years, and we get a SWOLED 2 with great HDR, 1,000 nits, 1,200 nits, brightness in that display, obviously an OLED panel. That would just make my day. I'm sure John would be thrilled, but I don't think it's going to happen in the short-term future here necessarily.
Yeah. I think the other thing it would need would be a die shrink. To get increased battery life. But the funny thing is, of course, is that on the one hand, Switch 2 ships with a battery that's much smaller than PC handhelds, but at the same time, you are still getting effectively, a guaranteed 2 hours of battery life minimum on what are some pretty demanding games. I mean, I still can't get over the fact that Nintendo has delivered a handheld that can do Star Wars Outlaws handheld at under 10 watts. Assassin's Creed Shadows at under 10 watts. And those are viable experiences. Yes, they're cut back, but they work. And that, from my perspective, is quite remarkable. And I think that, as I said in Direct 245, all of the fuss about the process load, yes, it was justified to an extent. But when your real world experience is that you are getting these experiences and you are getting them at under 10 watts consumption, I think that's a massive, massive win. But Alex, let's talk about Switch 2, because you're not a fan particularly.
No.
Right?
No, I so like Oliver said, actually, for me, the ergonomics of the device are just the most cumbersome aspect of it, because my hands don't fit it well. And I guess if you did buy it for the docked experience, I really wouldn't recommend using the non-pro controller setup. I didn't find that very adequate. So it does require more of an investment to get like the full console-like experience out of it that rivals the other platforms in comfort. But as soon as you start using it purely as a handheld device, I think that is where it excels most, in spite of the screen, which is its biggest pain point. I do think when you look at the image quality of a game like Cyberpunk and you throw it next to the image quality you'll get on many of the AMD based systems, you're going to be getting, I don't know, I find DLSS a lot better than FSR2. Just because like the size of the pixels, when they do that little blowout over sharpened thing on disocclusion with FSR2, it just really bothers my eyes. Whereas I find like the softer presentation of DLSS so much better. And so the titles we've seen DLSS running in, I think they have been really great. You also get the fact that not every developer on PC is going to give handheld settings, which they should maybe. That could be argued, but with the Switch 2 version, as long as it's not like some really junky, Tomb Raider port, they're going to give you settings that are, approachable, reasonable. The sacrifices they make are just to make the experience possible. And they're usually a lot, I would say, more graceful than like just whacking everything to very low in a lot of games. So I'd say that is the one thing. It's kind of like the whole deal is like when you have a platform that has its own API anyway, they're going to be spending so much effort to just get it running in the first place that they're also going to look in other areas to make the nips and tucks that seem reasonable, unlike on a mass platform device where they just have generic settings. So I think that's its really big advantage, presuming that the rate of ports keeps up. That's what I would really like to see coming into the new year, in year 2 of Switch 2. I think a lot of developers didn't have access to the hardware for development purposes, and hopefully now that has changed greatly so that we'll start seeing a ramping up of ports, because as soon as you start getting stuff like Assassin's Creed on there and Star Wars Outlaws, I think that bodes well for other experiences that had like 60 FPS PS5 versions. Well, then maybe they're eminently scalable with some tweaks, obviously, to Switch 2. And I hope that's kind of the way it works out in the end for people who own that platform.
Yeah, my final point on Switch 2 is it's quite interesting to see the Series S comparisons, because it's holding up really well even with lower resolutions. And it's holding up even well with lower resolutions when it's using tiny DLSS, which I find quite interesting. I mean, I kind of get on board with what you were saying, Alex, in your DLSS analysis, which is that, hey, maybe you should be using tiny DLSS just for the handheld versions, and proper DLSS for the full screen one. I get what you're saying there. But these comparisons that Oliver and Tom are coming up with are looking very, very good for Switch 2, even though on paper the resolution metrics are actually much poorer. The one that really sticks out to me is the Street Fighter comparison, Street Fighter 6, I believe.
That's brutal.
Where, it's literally quarter resolution on Switch 2, and yet kind of resolving better net across the sort of test clips that we've seen there. Maybe DLSS has actually indeed turned out to be Switch 2's secret weapon, and I do wonder how successful those ports would have been without it. But yeah, fascinating stuff. Okay, we're going to move on now. We're going to be talking about the best CPU of the year. And I think there's pretty much only one candidate, because there have been some pretty lackluster releases this year. Ryzen 9000 came out, and the non-X3D parts weren't particularly compelling against Ryzen 7000. Intel came out with the 285K, and it wasn't great, which meant that all of the components less powerful than the 285K were even less compelling. One product stood out, I think, this year for being absolutely phenomenal, and I bought one, and it is the Ryzen 9 9950X3D, which is essentially the 9950X, but with the 3D cache attached just to one of the CCDs. This is pretty cool because what you're getting is, I mean, obviously it commands a price premium, but what you're getting is a CPU for everything, right? You're getting a CPU that's absolutely fantastic for productivity. In fact, in our benchmarks, it was slightly faster than the non-X3D cache version, which is just terrific. But for gaming wise, I mean, there's been problems in the past with just one CCD getting the cache, but based on our benchmarks, the 9950X3D delivered pretty much the same performance as the 9800X3D. And certainly where it's not quite as fast, it's basically an irrelevant difference. So, let's just quickly talk about some of the sort of benchmarks here. Compared to 9950X without the 3D, Baldur's Gate 3, basically 48% faster than the non-X3D model. These are our launch benchmarks, by the way. There may well have been improvements since then because Ryzen 9000 really didn't do great out the gate, but this is the picture as we saw it. 32% faster than non-X3D, Dragon's Dogma 2, 35% faster in Flight Simulator 2020. So that 3D cache, I mean, it does speak to kind of like the fact that maybe games need to be more optimized for lower caches, maybe. But when you do have that extra cache, rather, you are getting like huge increases in performance, relatively for a CPU, right? The funny thing is, of course, that there are games that are better on Intel CPU wise than AMD, but because you've got this massive like increase in performance, it basically powers past what Intel is delivering. Sometimes the gaps are small, but basically to be the fastest in everything is quite an achievement. So for example, Dragon's Dogma 2, our custom run here, it's only 15% faster than the 14900K, right? Okay. Fair enough. However, you go to Baldur's Gate 3, which is faster on AMD, and suddenly you're looking at a 43% advantage over the 14900K there, which is like phenomenal. 32% faster in Flight Simulator 2020. So you've got this, it's an actual Halo product, right? I mean, there has been talk about adding a second 3D cache tile to the second CCD, but looking at these benchmarks, I don't understand what it would actually do.
Yeah,
how it would actually be any better. And I just think that I would love to have been, and maybe this is something we should pitch to AMD. It's like at some point somebody said, hey, if we add this extra cache to our existing parts, we get this gigantic increase in gaming performance. And it is pretty much only gaming performance where you see it. And I'd love to have, speak to whoever came or whatever team came up with that idea and how they actualized this product, because it's kind of niche, but it's just fantastic, right, Alex?
Yeah, it's basically changed our paradigm, I would say, on our PC testing, because the high-end PC, even with like when I was using the 12900K, I was impressed by performance, but I was still getting hangups occasionally by, I still think Bizarro E-core decisions and hyper-threading being less viable these days than it might have been in the past. And with the X3D products and the 9800X3D the most, and even this product even more so, is you just kind of don't get any of the downsides at all for all the high performance and money you're spending. You're getting just incredible performance across the board. And it was a revitalization to the AM4 platform, I would say, where it really just gave it such longevity. For the AM5 platform, you're getting all the nice PCIe benefits, NVMe speed, but then you also get like best in class. Like there's pretty much the games that run poor on the 9800X3D don't really exist, but those games that have issues, the 9800X3D is such a good processor that when the game has issues, I can just point at the game wholly and completely. I can't say there's some issue with our hardware anymore, or like I can't be like, oh, E-cores are the problem. It's your game, man. So I really like these processors, and I actually like the fact that now that there isn't a great difference between the productivity workload and the gaming performance like we saw in the past on the AMD side due to processes like this, and the fact that their scheduling in Windows has gotten so much better so that when you do load up a game, it is loading up the right half of the processor without issues. So I'd say in general, the X3D line has been incredible, and it's really good to see it continuing to be a beast.
Yeah, the final point I'd like to say about the 9950 X3D and just fast CPUs in general. I mean, the paradigm typically has been in the past that you should be always GPU bound, and therefore your requirement for a fast CPU goes down, right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of should make sense. It's certainly what happens in the consoles for the most part, and that's kind of the way it should be. The thing is, though, we're in the era now where you can buy, as a matter of course, 360 hertz upwards monitors. So what's actually happening in games is that you're ping-ponging between being GPU bound and CPU bound, depending on the situation. And you basically, when you're CPU bound, you kind of want best of the best performance, and that's what X3D is doing. Oliver, thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting product because in my day-to-day use, I'm very invested in the Apple ecosystem and much less so on PC. And obviously, you can get pretty great experiences that are comparable, very, 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 very similar with the 9800X3D, which is a good place to settle, I think, if you're more interested in gaming. But this seems like a really good compromise point if you are interested in gaming, but also need like video production workloads. At least that's what it seems like to me, looking at various content production tests here. It seems like, 9950X3D is about the best you can get in consumer hardware at the moment. And that's actually a really good space to be in, considering the fact that a lot of workloads don't scale that well with really high core count CPUs with the Threadrippers of this world. So this is actually a really good compromise point to pick. In my own testing, I took a look at the M3 Ultra, the Apple M3 Ultra versus the 9950X, which is a very comparable processor in some ways, and at least non-gaming workloads. And it does seem substantially faster than this, but obviously, 9950X3D system is actually in the realm of reasonably priced, whereas perhaps the Apple product is substantially less so. Although in that case, it's a different kind of form factor, different kind of computer. So I think this is just like, it's a good place to settle if, like Rich, you're interested in gaming, but you also have these kind of creator workloads, content production workloads, things like this. It's a really great no compromise experience to have. And then, of course, if you're more interested in gaming, 9800X3D is going to do you just fine. So I think AMD has really positioned themselves super well by basically having the best gaming CPU, a really great productivity CPU, if not the best in many workloads, and just an all-around hit it out of the park kind of product here.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. I think the only regret I have is that there's still, the high-end desktop segment has basically disappeared into the high-end consumer sector. And certainly in terms of PCIe lanes, we kind of want more, right, Alex?
Yeah,
but,
basically,
that is what it is.
Our workload requires sometimes multiple capture cards. Even sometimes the idea of having multiple GPUs is also somewhat intriguing for different workloads, or just multiple workloads at the same time, depending on how many streams are going on. So that's the one thing that the PC consumer space, before you started getting into ridiculously wacko expensive enterprise solutions, I still think needs to be solved. So getting a ton of PCIe lanes would be great, because as soon as you have a lot of boards, and in general, they really want you to just have like one super high fast NVMe. And as soon as you go above 2, for example, then you start limiting everything you can do on your PC. Most boards don't even work with more than 2 really well. So it's the nature of the beast at the moment.
Yeah, the concepts of plug and play doesn't really apply when you for example, you put in an NVMe drive and suddenly one of your PCIe slots doesn't work anymore. That's just doesn't quite compute, does it? Or you suddenly get like half the bandwidth and suddenly you can't capture 4K 60 on your capture card anymore.
Yep.
That's kind of, just all manner of hilarity just from constrained PCIe buses, the amount of lanes there. But anyway, let's move on. Let's talk graphics, because we've had 2 interesting product launches this year. I don't know whether you could call them, well, I don't know. I guess they are. They are the best hardware we've had of the year. But there have been issues. Let's talk about, first of all, the Blackwell lineup from Nvidia. Now, it did deliver a proper Halo product. We had the RTX 5090, which is basically, I don't know, maybe 25 to 35% faster than the 4090, which is, bearing in mind, it's very difficult to find the limits of a 4090 on today's games if you're using DLSS or whatever. So the concept that you have that big step up in performance with the 5090, plus you've got frame generation on top, it's pretty awesome. It's an awesome product. But it is awesome, I think, to the point where I never quite feel that I'm hitting the limits of what it's actually doing. But I guess, when you've got like a 240 hertz 4K monitor, then you can actually start to see it fly, particularly with frame generation and multi-gen. But the rest of the lineup, 5080 was coming in about sort of 10 to 15% faster than a 4080 Super. And it's, the thing about Blackwell is it was created on the same process technology as Ada 40 series. So the gains were always going to be more limited there. It kind of possibly suggests that this is the way things are probably going to be in future, based on the fact that moving to new process nodes is going to become rarer. Mm-hmm. And when you do move to those new process nodes, the chips are going to become more expensive, which means that you probably will get like fewer CUDA cores relative to what you had on prior gens and stuff like that. So it's kind of like a transitionary product in many ways, Blackwell. Alex also came with various and unexpected from Nvidia, to be honest, driver problems.
Yes.
The first few months, which definitely put a dampener on the experience. I don't know though, reaching the end of the year, we actually do have the cards mostly at MSRP. Nothing better is going to be coming along for a good old while. I do think it's probably a good time to actually start to consider buying one of these things before
who knows what happens.
The VRAM, GDDR7 modules. But yeah, thoughts on Blackwell?
Well, I think Blackwell's introduction at CES was fantastic. Because it was NVIDIA showing that they're improving their software package over time. It came with the launch of the Transformer model. MFG, I think, is a very convincing presentation. In fact, I'd recommend it in most games for those people who do want to have a 240 hertz experience at all, or even higher, 360, what have you. And I think all those things are great. It's just when you start looking at the price versus previous gen, and you just kind of recollect to PC days of yore, and you think of like a GTX 970, and just you get like a little bit sad that there's no like absolute killer product until you get to the ultra high end, where the 5090 is an unstoppable beast, but you're paying ridiculous money for it, right? And I feel like since it doesn't, like with the other products, as you're going down the line, you start making concessions, even though you're already giving out a lot of money, I would argue. And that's the thing that always kind of saddens me about the current market. And that you see that also somewhat as well with the other manufacturers, AMD and Intel. They all have their own little things that don't line up in the product, I would say, for their price always. But on the Nvidia side, the lower you go down, it does really feel, you could start to feel it a lot more, especially when you get into the 5070 range, which I think is a good GPU for its core. But I still think when you have that much power as that GPU has, you always want a little bit more versatility. And I think 12 gigabytes is limiting to the versatility of such a powerful GPU. It could easily be a very amazing 4K GPU. It's just that you'd have to be a little bit more conservative when you load up a game and making sure you're not pushing texture quality too high, or some games have issues where this is a GPU that can do path tracing, but as soon as you turn on path tracing due to the size of BVH and everything on the GPU, you have to maybe then start turning down things like texture quality, which that's a trade-off. Image lighting is really good, but like it's just one I wish you didn't have to make based upon the amount of money you're spending. So but also we also had some interesting stuff at the beginning where Blackwell did stretch its legs over drivers over time. It did get a bit better over time, but just the initial wave of reviews where we saw like the 5080 and 4080S I know it did eventually pull ahead in some key titles and everything like that, but like the initial reviews I thought looked really bad, where it was like, what is the point of Blackwell if it's almost running the exact same? And as we were just discussing before this, the fact that there isn't in the lineup of Blackwell cards, there is no replacement for the 4090, I also feel is an issue, because 4090 is going to be eventually no longer produced. It was already a Halo product anyway, and there was no way to get into that upper echelon of VRAM on the Nvidia side where there's no problems in game. 24 gigabytes, zero problems in game. 16 gigabytes, you'd be surprised. There can be occasional problems in games if you're running the path tracing, ultra ridiculous stuff, you know, or just some titles that have really terrible VRAM management. There was no like middle range card between the 4080 and 5090 to get that 4090 experience within Blackwell. And I felt like that was a really big missed opportunity. I always feel like the 5080 should have been a bigger card with a different bus and a just different VRAM configuration. Even if it had the same level of performance, I think it would have been a great thing to just have more VRAM on such an expensive GPU. But that's just me.
Yeah, it's a bit weird. Yeah, I think the way I'm looking at it is the 5080 is essentially half of a 5090, and you're paying half of a 5090. But yeah, there is this yawning chasm in between. You can overclock a 5080, and in many cases it gets within spitting distance of a 4090, but it's very much title by title basis there, and you shouldn't really be overclocking anyway to get that performance, in my opinion. The fact that there is overclocking headroom left over on the 50 series, I find kind of interesting. I don't know why it's there. Maybe it's, you know, to facilitate a super refresh in combination with extra memory. I don't know. The 5070 Ti is, I think, probably at the sweet spot. You're getting the 16 gigs of memory. The issue is that AMD has a very good competitor there, the 9070 XT, that is a fair amount cheaper. Then you get to the 5070 itself. Yes, you're right. I don't know though. I don't think you're looking at running ultra best of the best on the 70 class series anymore, which presents issues of its own, but it is what it is. It is a pretty good product, I think, since it kind of dropped beneath MSRP. I think a lot of, you know, in retrospect, going back to the reviews, a lot of the concerns were about the fact that you couldn't actually buy the products at MSRP, but now you can. And I think, you know, looking at both Blackwell and RDNA 4, there aren't really that many quote unquote bad products anymore. Right. Apart from the 8 gig versions of 5060 Ti and 5060. I think, you know, a 5070 is a perfectly fine product. The one issue that I have in terms of frame generation, though, is it becomes more expensive the lower down the stack you get in terms of compute power that it requires, or frame time rather, more specifically. So its utility diminishes the more you actually need it. Mm-hmm. So you kind of have to make some pretty, you know, you have to really think carefully about your settings when using MFG on a 5070, and you need to be looking at latency and stuff like that, because it does start to add up. So I think there's a lot of work NVIDIA needs to do in terms of the journey from making frame generation a value added feature into a kind of like a staple like DLSS super resolution has become. That journey, I think they're still only about, 30 to 40% of the way there. They still need to solve that latency problem. And while they're buffering a frame, I'm not sure how they can. I'm going to be very interested to see if there's any kind of new DLSS coming next year. But overall, I mean, the 5060 would have been great if it had more memory. But I kind of understand why it is what it is. 5050, never even looked at it, but it is basically a 4060, right? I just think that's okay. You know, okay, not great, but at the same time, it kind of highlights again that the 5060 should have had 12 gigs. However, that would have been managed. Yeah. Interesting though, nonetheless. Oliver, thoughts on Blackwell?
Yeah, I feel like you guys have covered the bases pretty well here, but at the very top end of the stack, I think Blackwell is kind of cool because the 5090 extends NVIDIA's performance lead there at the very top end. But it's not meaningfully more efficient than the 4090, so you're kind of just putting more wattage into more performance, which isn't great. Also, the 4090 was already so fast, and I feel like the 4090, most of the software that I could run on it wouldn't saturate that card, and certainly wouldn't saturate a 5090. Indeed, a lot of the games that I'm playing nowadays will run at like 150 or 200 watt load on my 5090, which is pretty funny. The fans barely even need to spin up at that point. So it's not very stressful unless you get to like the higher end ray tracing workloads, higher end path tracing workloads, then you can really push it. But obviously it's the fastest card in the market. That's quite good. Blackwell in general, I mean, at an architectural level, there are things that look really cool, like the dual pumping of integer math, the 2xing of ray triangle intersections on the RT cores and things like that. But it doesn't really show up that well in the benchmarks. Maybe in path tracing workloads, maybe in RT workloads a little bit more. But that's not ideal. The cards are good enough, but there's not really that big improvement gen on gen architecturally that you're looking for out of NVIDIA that NVIDIA is often known for delivering here. Yeah, I think overall, architecturally, it's not that exciting, at least at the moment. There may be some things in the future that will come out that are more interesting with that architecture, but I think that at least at the high end, it's cool, but aside from that, it's kind of not that amazing of a generation of product, I think.
Right. Yeah. I think that I'm looking at the pricing side of things. Now we are at MSRP. It's quite interesting that the 70 class products, I mean, there was a huge price bump with 20 series when it went up to $500.
Right.
But today's 70 class product is $550 MSRP. You can get it for lower than that on certain sales at the moment. So, in that respect, that particular part of the market, I think, is actually done okay. It's just NVIDIA kind of shot themselves in the foot with the 5070 by saying 4090 performance, which, come on, that didn't fool anyone. That was a really bad move, because now you have actually got these sub MSRP products. I actually find the 5070 quite recommendable. But the thing is, all of those reviews that you're going to find online are going to be talking about that really bad marketing point from almost a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
That was a really bad move. Anyway, let's move on. Let's talk RDNA 4. Three principal products there: the 9060 XT, the 9070, and the 9070 XT. Alex, what do you make about this? I mean, my view on RDNA 4 is that, well, first of all, we got FSR 4, which was long overdue and certainly does a job there and is actually providing a proper alternative now to NVIDIA. I think AMD deserve kudos for that. The products themselves, great, I'd say, in terms of sort of price versus performance. I think they're pretty good. The 9070 non-XT, possibly not so good. We were expecting a trouncing of the 5070 and it didn't really happen, but XT against the 5070 Ti is actually looking pretty good now, and it is a good chunk cheaper. Ray tracing performance improved. We've got Redstone coming along, which clearly is a work in progress.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say that we're still in a sort of transitionary period for AMD, where they've kind of finally woken up to what's happening in the graphics market and need to catch up pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's the appreciation I had. It all started with Oliver and I at CES and seeing a preview version of FSR4 running on RDNA 4 technology, which was the 9070 XT at that point in time, just unlabeled in the rig in front of us. And I think that was a great showing of just the general strangeness of AMD's PR, where we just like, with NVIDIA, it's just like, they launch a product and there's like 6 new technologies with it, and they throw you in a room with tons of people explaining it. And AMD is just like, I walk in and what is this? No one told me about this beforehand. So I would, that is the difference. And that it kind of also then, that goes over to their software launch on PC. I feel like FSR 4, it was weird the way we were introduced to it, but when it came out, it was really high quality and great. But the rest of the software launches across the year were less successful, specifically at ray regeneration and all of FSR Redstone, where it came out like in this kind of stutter stop, kind of at the gate way that didn't really make much sense why ray regen launched earlier than the rest of the Redstone package, and it's only in one weird title in the multiplayer component. And then you have MLFG, where I still fundamentally disagree with the idea that you should be required to use VSync and an external frame rate cap to get your frame pacing more orderly on a frame generation way. I think Nvidia couples frame generation on their side with reflex, which does a lot of things, and that is not required on the AMD side, the equivalent technology. So they suffer. You can just turn on, if you have like a 240 hertz monitor on the Nvidia side, you can just turn on FG in a game and not worry about much of anything, because you're not going to be getting like many frames below 4 millisecond anyway, or something like that. But on the AMD side, you would need to be doing at least 2 more steps, and that is not guaranteed even frame pacing there, because you're maybe at the whims of whatever VSync presentation is going to do with that frame. So it's like, I don't think that is a good way to launch the technology the way they did. But RDNA 4 is interesting to me because it's like AMD finally getting to like a little bit above ampere level. It'll be fast. An RX 9070 XT will be faster than a 3090 across the board, pretty much, right? But it took them that much longer to do it, to get to that level, and it's still not the top end product. I really wish RDNA 4 did have an ultra high end product beyond the 9070 XT, just for word of mouth reasons, because the Nvidia dominates the conversation whenever you start talking about high-end graphics, because they have a high-end graphics card and AMD doesn't really have one. So it's like when everyone's like talking about spending X amount of money on a PC, as soon as they get above a certain threshold, sticking with AMD is mainly a question of like brand loyalty versus a actually smart idea of just getting the better product at that point in time. And I feel like that's where AMD needs alternatives in each price category. RDNA 4, once again, though, it's getting up there. It offered finally some new stuff that they didn't do beforehand. But looking towards the future, is it always going to be that way? Will they have the same legacy support that NVIDIA has? And there I have greater question marks, because we got the transformer model for super resolution on DLSS, frame gen, RR, as well as FG. It was backported to the products that supported those technologies, whereas I don't know if that'll be the case for RDNA 4 in the future, based upon how RDNA 2 and 3 are right now.
Oliver, what do you think?
Well, I like RDNA 4. I like the 9070 XT. I think they have, good RT performance, good price performance, especially with the higher end devices there. They have a really huge improvement in terms of efficiency per square millimeter of die over RDNA 3, which is quite large relative to its performance. Now here, there is some lack of efficiency maybe with like the 9070 XT, but the 9070 improves that dramatically, I think, by just decreasing the clocks, decreasing the configuration. They're the best products for path tracing, but they're good enough in a lot of ray tracing workloads to actually be a viable product. My only real complaint about RDNA 4, at least relative to expectations, is it's not in handhelds, it's not in Steam Machine. It's a good architecture, but it's not showing up in very many places. It seems like something that would really work well in low power applications. There's just nothing there. Seems like something that might even be good, and if they had more laptop design wins, it's just really in desktops at the moment. That's a pretty limited slice of the overall gaming market, unfortunately. Also, AMD doesn't have a great history of supporting prior architectures, and the fact that they're really just leaving RDNA 3 out there with no FSR4 equivalent, that's disappointing. Not that I necessarily needed it or expected it, but the fact that they're dropping those architectures so quickly, it doesn't give you a lot of confidence in their future roadmap for a product like this that might cost you a significant outlay of money, especially when NVIDIA is dropping, DLSS 4 for 2018 cards on 12 nanometers. Those are pretty ancient pieces of technology, and yet NVIDIA is doing, I think, a much better job of supporting their older cards. Obviously, Redstone, that's been talked about already. That's been disappointing thus far. The rollout is very quizzical, very bizarre, like Alex mentioned. So yeah, let's just see where it goes. I mean, RDNA 5 looks very exciting if any of the rumblings from the Mark Cernys of the world and the Copite 7 Kimmies of the world are anything to go off of. But for now, RDNA 4 is good. I just wish it showed up in more places because I think it's a cool architecture.
Yeah. I'd also like to put a quick shout out to the 9060 XT 16GB version. It is appreciably faster than the 5060 Ti.
Right.
You're getting the 16 gigs of RAM at $350. You are getting performance, which is faster than a PS5 Pro. And I think that's pretty cool. It seemed to get like massacred by the review, by the tech press at launch. I really liked it. I thought it was cool. And the other thing, of course, is that when you get to that sort of cheaper price point and the lower capabilities of the GPU, the features of Nvidia beyond DLSS super resolution, multi-frame gen, for example, even normal frame gen, the computational cost of frame generation at those on those lower power GPUs makes it more difficult to use. And, basically nullifies an advantage Nvidia has against AMD at that point. So when you're looking at the 9060 XT, I thought it was actually a pretty good product, and price versus performance looked pretty good as well. So I kind of liked it. But let's move on. Okay, so let's quickly talk about what we expect to see in the new year. Obviously, you two are going to CES. My back can't really handle a 12-hour flight anymore in economy class. Seeing bolt upright for 12 hours isn't really my bag anymore, sorry. But I wish you all the best there.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just wondering what we're going to see. We're not going to see, as far as we can tell, any kind of super refresh for Blackwell. I haven't heard any indications at all of any new RDNA 4 products from AMD. CPU-wise, we should be seeing Panther Lake from Nvidia. From Intel. What am I saying? And we should be seeing, hopefully, something you'd hope, at least a preview of Zen 6 from AMD. I'd love to see what's going on there. Alex, what are you looking forward to?
Well, I want to see Intel back in the game and actually offering viable competition for the enthusiast. Mid-range is, that's a more questionable space when you get to mid-range and lower end. For the longest time, those older Core I processors from Intel actually did a really good job in that lower end segment. 12400 is the one you always think of. But when you got up to the high end, you were just dealing with ridiculous power, failing parts, and then the 285K, which I think is just a very disappointing product. Scoring worse than your predecessor is giving me Pentium 4 flashbacks, like it's not good. And that just wasn't great. And then all the issues with the company. So I would like to see Panther Lake reassert Intel's ability to be competitive on the high end segment. Yeah. One thing I don't think.
Okay, so Panther Lake is a mobile part.
Oh, sorry, I meant to
say. Arrow Lake is going to get a refresh, which isn't particularly compelling. And then I think towards the end of the year we should see Nova Lake, where we're potentially going to be seeing a 52 core processor. Just kind of nuts.
Yeah, but, basically, that I want to see. But one thing I don't think we're going to see is large battle mage. I don't know if that's touted yet for CES, but what is it? Is the BMG 31? It would
be the B770 or the B780, something like that. I hope we do see it, right? Because it's starting to appear in benchmark leaks. Mm-hmm. So maybe a bigger. I think the problem is that, bearing in mind the size of the die, the B580 isn't especially efficient. So if you're making a bigger die, potentially it's even less efficient. We'll just have to wait and see. I mean, what are they actually targeting with it? I don't really know. I'd hope that we would get some sort of new product from Intel. But obviously with the situation with memory at the moment, it's difficult to launch anything that has any kind of memory at all.
Right. Especially since I don't think they're going to be thinking that such a device will sell a ton. So they'll have like a low amount of memory actually back ordered and things like that. But those are the two things that I'm interested in, at least from the Intel side, is their CPUs becoming more competitive and higher end GPUs, because I did like the A770, A770, 16 gigs RAM, came out at a great time. It was a shame that I really loved the design of the GPU. I also thought it was like minimalistic. Obviously, the partner cards look different, but I was hoping that they would start branching out into the higher end of the graphics card marketplace, where they had just previously been mainly that low middle range. And let's hope that comes in this year in 2026.
Yeah, going back to Panther Lake, I mean, there is talk that it's 50% more performant than Lunar Lake, in which case the handhelds coming out of that thing and the laptops should be really good gaming machines, which I really hoped to see proved out at CES. Oliver, I think an issue which you've alluded to earlier is that you are not going to be seeing RDNA 4 in mobile parts, which by extension, based on the rumors and things that we've seen so far, means that the AMD APUs for 2026 are basically going to be refreshed parts from 2025. So Strix Point becomes Gorgon Point, and that's not hugely exciting.
No, it's a disappointment, especially when we see what RDNA 4 can do on the desktop side of things. It's really disappointing it didn't show up in APUs, and I'm wondering exactly why that is, because it seems like they're just leaving this huge area of the market a little bit underserved with products that deliver much lower gen-on-gen increases, and that's very unfortunate. Obviously, with RDNA 5, maybe we're looking at 2027 there. Indeed, all GPU architectures, it seems like all next-generation family GPU architectures are going to head into 2027 when we talk about Intel Celestial, when we talk about the next-generation Rubin GPUs from Nvidia. Those are products that are scheduled way out here, unfortunately. But on the CPU side, things are more interesting. Obviously, Panther Lake, which has been mentioned, Nova Lake mentioned, AMD Zen 6. I think what's most interesting about them to me is they're all using kind of next-generation process technologies that we've not actually seen in consumer products. Intel's debuting the 18A process for, I think, the compute elements of their Panther Lake. It's a multi-chip design there with Panther Lake. So they're using a mix of process technologies from themselves and from TSMC, but some of those products are on 18A, some of those dies are on 18A. With AMD, Zen 6 is going to be a 2nm product, seeing those new processes, and in particular, Intel kind of regaining some performance leadership in that space with their 18A process, which it seems like they will. That's really, really cool. So yeah, on the CPU side of things, exciting. On the GPU side of things, much less so. But I think that for me, at least in terms of discrete products, I'm interested in the Lenovo Legion Go 2 SteamOS edition. That looks cool. So they're delivering another SteamOS variant of a prior Lenovo Legion handheld, which I'm always appreciative of because I really do like the Lenovo Legion Go S. And also I'm interested in seeing the monitor space because the PC monitor space has not been 100% to my liking in recent years, with the advent of kind of the high end being almost exclusively kind of OLED monitors, which have poor brightness characteristics in my opinion, but good bright image quality otherwise. I'm hoping to see a little bit more of an improvement on the brightness characteristics end of things perhaps for this year. That would be something I really like to see in OLEDs. And then maybe some use of more advanced technologies to reduce motion blur, things like that. That would be really appreciated in terms of the monitors. There are some rumors pre-CES of 1000 hertz monitors. I'll believe it when I see it. Last year I think we saw 750 hertz monitors. 1080p monitors, but at CES it's always fun because there's so many different kinds of things you don't really know what to expect in advance. So I'm sure we'll see interesting stuff on the show floor, and I think 2026 will bring some interesting technologies for sure.
Absolutely. Software side, I mean, surely Nvidia is going to continue to iterate and improve. They mentioned last year that Transformer model has got a lot of legs in it in terms of improvements. So I'm interested to see what they've got coming up there. I think also Microsoft has said that maybe they're going to be talking about their next generation console this year, which kind of suggests that we may see it in 2027. That would be interesting. But I think we can rule out anything interesting happening on the memory side of things. And I kind of just wonder how everyone is going to cope. I mean, I read stories over the weekend that OpenAI has basically optioned or bought 40% of the raw rate wafers for any kind of memory, which I think is just like phenomenal. No idea how the market's going to adapt to that. Certainly not good news for gamers though. And I think the only sort of thing I could really say is that if we are entering this dark age of a lack of technological progress in the PC space and maybe delays to the consoles, at least the products we've got now are pretty good, all told. I guess there's just this uncertainty in the ecosystem and the knock-on effects of, one component suddenly becoming extremely expensive. I'm seeing now that people are sort of looking to extend the lives of their AM4 product platforms, which means that products like the 5700X3D and 5800X3D are suddenly massively expensive. I mean, I bought my 5800X3D for actually no, the 5700X3D, I bought it for £130 off AliExpress. I've basically doubled. I could sell that now at double the price, which is just like nuts for an old technology. So a lot of uncertainty in the market there. I've got no idea how it's all going to play out, but it's not looking good. Any final thoughts, Alex?
Yeah, I guess in 2026, I should be looking forward to maybe another price hike on Xbox Series X.
Man, that's dark. Oliver, final thoughts?
I mean, I just hope that the memory supply and pricing issue doesn't scupper any upcoming products too badly. Obviously, the Steam machine is in the crosshairs for that. Everyone's anticipating what Valve's final pricing will be, and if indeed they put any level of subsidy into that product at all, or if they'll just force us to eat that gigantic RAM bill that will certainly be coming their way with that 24 gigabytes of memory on that device combined. Obviously, it's not unified, but I'm hoping that isn't too much of an issue. I expect that it'll be more of an issue, unfortunately, with low-end and mid-range products. Maybe at the high end, maybe with your Apples of the world, your high-end GPUs, things like that, they can afford to maybe eat a little bit of margin potentially. I regret to say, maybe the manufacturers can actually eat a little bit of margin. Maybe that can actually be reasonable. Maybe they can maintain existing RAM allotments. But for other devices, I mean, I've heard, maybe smartphones are going to go back to lower memory capacities, things like this, at least, again, in more mainstream elements of the market there. So that's a big concern, a big constraint. But like you said, Rich, I'm happy. I'm actually reasonably happy with the offerings that we have right now. GPUs are great, in a good place, I think. CPUs are in a good place. Even the consoles, they're old. But, I mean, I'm not upset with PS5 games at the moment. I think they run perfectly well. So I don't think there's an overwhelming desire or urgency to get new hardware out there in the same way that there was this time PS3 generation, this time Xbox One, PS4 generation. I actually feel pretty comfortable at the moment with how things are.
Okay, good stuff. Well, I guess Steam Machine will be the next big hardware launch, fingers crossed, but that's it for talking about 2025. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you guys come up with from CES 2026. But that's all from us on this one. So if you enjoyed the content, please do like, subscribe, share, ring bells for notifications and stuff like that. But really, it's all about the DF supporter program. We can't do what we do without your support. So please do check that out at patreon.com/Digital Foundry. But that's all from us. Thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry.